Good evening and welcome to the Savvy Street Show. I am joined again today by my regular co-host, the three-in-one, a four-in-one, should I say, writer, editor, musician, and philosopher, Roger Bissell. Welcome to the show, Roger, and it will be Roger's turn to introduce our special guest. We're going to talk about education, so we have an expert on education. Over to you, Roger.
Thank you, Vinay. Marsha Enright is an educational entrepreneur, educator, and writer with a BA in biology and an MA in psychology. She created the Reliance College Fund, which runs the Great Connection seminars. Its Great Books-based liberal arts program, informed by the Montessori method, Ayn Rand's ideas, and classical liberalism, uses a powerful methodology to provide a broad education that encompasses the full range of influential ideas in civilization. Marsha is also the author of the book Teaching Freedom: Why the Way We Teach Students is as Important as the What. And she has written on a broad range of other topics, from neuropsychology to philosophy to contemporary literature. Several of her essays have appeared in the Journal of Ayn Rand Studies, and I will be referring to them in some of my questions. So welcome to the show, Marsha.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. Now, my first question deals with Ayn Rand's ethical philosophy. She argued that selfish is the correct way to designate a person who lives according to the objectivist ethics, and that selfishness is a virtue. However, in your 2014 essay, The Problem with Selfishness, you question the wisdom of her using the term selfishness in this way. It has many problems, it confuses people, and you have suggested a better way to convey the noble qualities of her ethical views might be a term such as inspired egoism or inspired individualism. But I'm wondering, aren't egoism or individualism or even rational self-interest, which is another term she uses, aren't these really dirty words to many people?
Well, certainly they are, but they don't have the same problem as the word selfishness. As I said in my essay, selfish from the beginning of its use, which was some centuries ago, was equated with a very negative ethical point of view. And the second major problem I think that we have with it, is that it leaves us, if we use selfishness to mean the kind of rational, long-term, life-enhancing ethic that we want to advocate, then what do we call the people who don't act altruistically, but they will do anything for an immediate pleasure or immediate money or anything like that? What do we call them? We don't have a concept for them then. So I think that's the two basic and fundamental problems with these. It was a brilliant use of it marketing-wise. I mean, I know a lot of people who were very interested in the book because it was called The Virtue of Selfishness. The very paradox of that drew people to reading the book. So marketing-wise, it was a brilliant use. But I think it's a problem. People have known me for decades, and they'll say, I know you seem to have your own set of ideas about it. What is it that's, what are you following? And I'll try to use the word selfishness to explain. Their eyes just go up in their head because they don't understand how that fits with the way I'm acting. So it's a big problem, I think.
Yeah, I decidedly agree with you. I had the same view since 2010. But my wife, for instance, refuses to read the book because she looks at the title and says, I'm not going to read it.
Oh,
That's the Virtue Selfishness book. So on Rand generally, would you call yourself an objectivist? Do you think that there are any errors or gaps in objectivism?
If you mean, do I agree with much or most of the philosophy, especially the basic premises? Yes, I agree with a lot of it. And I think that, but Rand herself said that there were things that needed to be worked on. She called her book The Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology. What does that imply? That there's a lot more work to be done. It was funny. I was talking to some friends of mine the other day, Carrie Ann Biondi, philosophy professor, and Stephen Hicks. And I think one of the major problems for people coming to objectivism and trying to incorporate it into their life is that we have the very abstract ideas from her essays, like the virtue of selfishness, justifying ethical egoism. And then we have the instantiation of those ideas in her novels. We have the particulars. But there are a lot of concepts in between that need to be understood. And, if you think about the founders of the United States, they were very interested in these kind of intermediary lists of virtues and how to live your life and implementing. Think of Franklin with his junto and his list of virtues and his thinking, every day, did I live up to my own virtues? There's so many intermediary concepts that need to be explicated so that, because not everybody's going to be able to figure it out on their own. So I think that's a big problem. And there's lots of other aspects to the philosophy that could be worked on. I think there's plenty. So
Any gaps, but are there errors? Did you think there are errors?
I haven't found anything that I particularly think is an error.
Okay.
Did you have something in mind?
Maybe not for today, but yeah, we've discussed that in our own podcast.
Okay.
And we also spoke about it in our common book, co-authored book, Modernizing Aristotle's Ethics. So,
Yeah. I mean,
which is,
comparing, if you read the Nicomachean Ethics, I mean, I'm sure I haven't read your book, but I'm sure you talk about it in there, that if you read the Nicomachean Ethics, you realize how Aristotelian Rand's ethics are. She's just has certain different way of approaching certain things.
Yep.
And she's putting arguments in that Aristotle did not have. But Aristotle has a lot of the discussion of the intermediary problems, and concepts. It was interesting because I'm in a group that was discussing in detail the Nicomachean Ethics, and somebody said, well, why does he say, I'm trying to remember how he says it. Why does he say that he can't give an exact principle for judging X or Y in a particular situation? And instead that, and I said, because it involves the measurements, that in any particular situation where you're making an ethical judgment about an individual action or a person, you have to take into account many different features of it, many different principles, and the exact amount of whatever's happening. And that's something that can't easily be explicitly written out. And that people, there was so in the novel 93 by Victor Hugo, there's a scene in which one of the heroes has to make a judgment about something. And he takes all night to think about it. And he thinks about this aspect and that aspect. And what he's doing is he's weighing the importance of these different ethical principles and acts and facts in order to come up with his judgment. So that's something that's Aristotle talks about quite a bit, but Rand doesn't. And I think it's something that is worth knowing about. So in some respects, I'm sure your book does this. In invoking Aristotle's ethics can fill in a bunch of the things that maybe aren't in the intermediary concepts in objectivism.
Right. You can't read the answer to some ethical questions or problems like you would off the side panel of a cereal box, the RDA, you have 30% potassium, whatever. In another essay in 2002, you objected to Rand saying emotions are not tools of cognition. And you wondered, well, what are they then? And I would grant that emotions are highly important material to use conceptually, to use in reasoning, thinking. And I would point out that wood, for instance, is an important material for use with tools like hammers and screwdrivers, but we wouldn't call wood a tool, we'd call it a material. And so I'm wondering, doesn't it make sense if we just start out by admitting emotions are very important information or data, but they're not tools of cognition, they're material, they're data, like our sense perceptions or like our thoughts, our introspective data. What would you think about that?
I think that's a sensible way to approach it. I mean, it all depends on what you mean by tool, right?
Yep.
Because that's part of the issue. Because if I am trying to make an ethical decision, or for example, people don't realize this, but even a hunch is an emotion. And a hunch is a kind of cognitive emotion, right? It's telling you, I'm thinking this is the right way to think about X, Y, or Z. And there's a feeling that goes along with it. You don't talk about hunch as if it's just a cognitive thing itself. And so it can be a tool. I guess the way I was thinking of it is it's a tool in the sense that, okay, it's indicating to you, or you can use it to help plumb your own thinking about things. But you're right. I mean, you could call it the material that you're using too. I don't have a big objection to that. I just think that there's more importance to being aware of your emotions and what they imply about what's going on in your subconscious, because you can't hold everything you need to know in your conscious mind. It's just impossible. So your subconscious holds a lot of material. It holds a lot of facts. It holds a lot of integrations of things that you have experienced and your values. And it's so your emotions can be a way to get at what's going on in your subconscious and really enrich your judgment about things. I mean, that's one of the problems with people who take philosophy rationalistically, is that they try to just take certain principles and just come to logical conclusions about them without taking into account the whole bigger richness of their experience and what they know.
Right. I like what you said a minute ago about hunches are not exactly thoughts. They're material from what? From our subconscious. And you would probably, well, I just want to know, would you say the same thing about an intuition or an insight that you have?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
a flash, yeah. Okay. Well, this whole field, it seems to me, I think there's a name for it, which twists everybody's tongue, but I've heard people call it psychoepistemology. And it's the relationship between
Yeah.
your conscious mind and your subconscious mind.
Yes.
And it almost sounds like an Alfred Hitchcock movie, psychoepistemology. But anyway, have you looked into this isn't on my list of questions, but have you looked into this area very much and studied or thought about it?
Oh, this is a prime area of interest for me. I mean, psychoepistemology is very important when it comes to education, because you have to ask yourself, how do you know whether somebody really understands? I have exactly the same mug. How do you know whether somebody really understands what you're teaching them? And how is it getting into their mind? How are they processing it? One of the people that I think is the most brilliant at talking about something like this is the author Arthur Koestler.
Yes.
Especially in his book, The Act of Creation.
Yes.
I thought it was just a brilliant insight about what's going on. He makes the argument that the processes, the conscious and subconscious processes in science, art, and humor are basically the same. And he has loads of data about it and explains what's going on there. I think it's just everybody should read it to understand more about their own mind. And
Totally.
what's interesting? I remember him say in the book arguing that we hold our knowledge in our mind in a matrix of multiply connected ways.
Yeah.
And in recent years, the neurobiology has found that it's literally that way.
Wow.
Like the neuronal connections are all matrical.
So the crisscross. Oh, since we are moving on to education, I wanted to ask you a question about this book that came out 10 years ago, Teaching Johnny to Think by Leonard Peikoff. It's actually based on a series of lectures he did in the 80s, and it's been edited, but there are no complaints. So I assume that the quotes that I'm going to quote are true. So in chapter 3, a proper curriculum, Leonard Peikoff says, I am not an advocate of Montessori. Past a certain age, I see no merit in continuing on the perceptual level after age 6, which obviously implies something. And he also says, I do not advocate what is called freedom in education. I'm uneasy with the idea of children following their own direction. So, other than for artistic prodigies, Peikoff seems to imply that there should be a rigid curriculum from age 4 to 15. And he also says philosophy is too abstract to teach at a pre-college level. So, do you agree with Peikoff's views on education and on Montessori particularly?
Well, I remember listening to those lectures years ago and being a bit astonished that he was criticizing Montessori at the same time that he said he didn't know that much about it.
Wow, didn't know.
And
That didn't make it. That didn't make it into the book. That transcription.
okay,
Because
well,
I just reread it. I reread the chapter. So right.
yeah, that's what he said in the lecture. And
Right.
I mean, right, just the quote that you said there that that he doesn't believe children should stay at the perceptual level. That's not what happens in a Montessori education.
Yeah.
Montessori education is developmentally oriented, so you're getting the kind of learning you need at your level of development. And when you start to be about 6 years old, that's when children start asking bigger conceptual questions about how did the universe get there? What are human beings? How did language arise? They're very philosophical, starting at about the age of 6. And in Montessori, we have plenty of materials and ways of addressing that, starting with what's called the great lessons, where we give the children, we do a dramatic presentation of, for example, the origin of the universe. And then from there, we go into to capture, because one of the things that Montessori said is that you want to inflame their imagination, to capture their minds and make them really motivated to learn. Because the ironic thing is, if you know 2-year-old children, you have to beat them to stop them from learning. They are such incredibly motivated learners. So what happens by the time a child gets to be 8 or 9 and they don't like school? Something's wrong there, because human beings, like Aristotle said, desire to know. And so in Montessori, it's an ingeniously designed system that addresses what children need at each level of their development, that allows the child to work at an individual pace. That doesn't mean they have to work individually. In fact, because they're not forced to share with each other, they love to work
Look,
together.
this.
The one other thing I wanted to say was he also misunderstands, and a lot of people do, that it's not total freedom in a Montessori class. It's freedom in a structured environment. In other words, you have a lot of freedom and a lot of choice within certain limits. For example, the materials, that are like games that we use in the Montessori classroom, you can't use them just any old way. You have to use them as materials. You can't just play with them as any kind of toy that you want. So that's fine. You can go play after school, or during the free time. So he really didn't understand. I'm sorry, he just doesn't understand what goes on in Montessori. So.
Well, I Marsha, I know that what you're saying is absolutely the case, not just in your school, but in other schools around the country. My five children all went to Montessori school, and I know that preschool is one thing and elementary is another. I don't want to be unfair to poor Leonard, but I think he just overgeneralized. He says, "Oh, this is a preschool, so it must all be that way,"
Yeah.
And so anyway, you sent a fundraising letter recently for your college and your Great Connections program,
Hmm.
and you spoke about the various projects and endeavors that you have put a lot of time and energy into to help children learn better, be more confident and self-reliant. And you did have a Montessori school for nearly 30 years in Chicago. And now you're planning a college. And the Great Connections summer get-togethers is kind of you call it a pilot program, I believe,
Hmm.
for high school and college students. Could you give us just a little bit of a history of this, how it came about, and why for you this is such an important mission?
Well, I don't know how many people I've told this, but so they may have heard this before. But when I was a child, I loved school. I loved to learn, and I was really annoyed at the other kids in class who were goofing around until I realized that they were really frustrated, and that's why they were goofing around. And so I said to myself, well, I don't want that for my own children. I want to find a method of learning that will keep them engaged in learning the whole time they're in school. And that's how. And then I read the Montessori method articles by Beatrice Husson in the Objectivist, and that got me interested. And then I read everything I knew about it, and I put my children in Montessori preschool, and then I started the elementary school because I wanted them to have as much opportunity as possible. Um, but my own interest has always been in young adults, the education of young adults. And I could see a long time ago, and I mean, Ayn Rand really tipped me off to this, what was going on in the colleges and the universities, that the left was getting control of it, and they were making it more and more politicized. They were taking away a lot of the kind of learning that you need in order to really develop your mind, in order to be independent in your thinking, and to know about the world and what's made the world the way it is. And I thought a long time ago that people of our point of view, not just people interested in Ayn Rand, but people who believe in classical liberalism and a free society, should have their own colleges that should be independent. So I started, talking about this some time ago, and I decided to take everything I knew about optimal education and put it into this summer program. And I have to say, I was from the first year, even I was surprised at the outcome. Because from the first year, the students said to me at the end of the week, I feel like my life has been transformed because now I can judge anything myself. Because what we do in the program is we have readings and learning activities across the domains. So from philosophy to physics to economics, literature, art, uh, history, and the purpose of that is so that the students can become skilled in readings of any kind. And then we have a specialized form of what's called a Socratic seminar, where the teacher is the guide, but the teacher is not telling the students, this is the right answer, this is the wrong answer. The teacher is helping the students in the group to use facts and reason about what you're reading to understand what the author said and to come to your own conclusions about it. And what happens is these young people who've had 12 years of sit down, read this, learn this, take a test, show me that you know what I just told you. They're just on cloud nine that not only are they able to, not only that they can talk about what they think about this reading, but they're learning how to make what they have to say valuable so that other people want to hear it and other people want to respond to it. And something. So they have to use facts and reason. So it really hones their thinking skills. They have to refer to the material in the text to justify whatever they're saying. And they get to hear the way other people interpret the same thing. And so what happens is you expand your toolbox of reasoning, because another person might come at it a different way than you do. And the next time you read something, you go, oh yeah, I could do it like Bridget was thinking about this. I might apply that idea to this reading. And just the very fact of being treated as if they had valuable things to say, but guiding them on how to have valuable things to say really transforms them.
Sure.
And we do the text readings, then we also do activities. We'll go out into the city. I think everybody tends to take for granted whatever's around them. And so I try to raise their awareness about how did this place get here in the shape that it is, and why, and the amazing achievements of human beings that have made it the way it is. And we'll go out and we'll learn about architectural styles. We'll go look at the buildings, and then I'll send them on an architectural scavenger hunt where they, in little groups, they have to go find different areas of the city and take a picture that they got there, to make it more fun. We do improv comedy, not classes, like exercises, because it's fun. And it's also another way to learn how to collaborate with other people, because that's another thing that our kind of discussion does, is you really learn how to listen to what the other person is saying deeply, not just sit there and wait till it's your turn to talk, but to listen to what the other person is saying and sincerely respond to it so that you actually have a dialogue. And this is an amazing skill for when you go to work. Recently, I interviewed a number of my students from Great Connections that went like in 2009, 2010. So now they're in the workforce. They're executives, they're engineers, they're software people. And they said they use that skill all the time. What they learned of being able to hear what other people say and to have a really productive conversation with other people for a goal.
Okay, well, I know this is near and dear to you. I could tell from what you said and how you said it. This is kind of a follow-up. In your letter, you also pointed out that so many young people these days are looking for direction. They're adrift and they don't know what to do with their lives. And they are in pursuit of clarity. Career clarity was the phrase you used. And I'm sure that's true. I think I was when I was in my late teens. Now, because such a sense of purpose or mission for young people could also play an important role in how they feel in control of their lives and their self-esteem, have you given thought to including in your curriculum such skills as personal SWOT analysis, or setting one's life purpose, personal values clarification, goal setting?
I meant to look up what SWOT was before we got on, but I forgot to.
Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So
I see. Okay. Well, my basic answer is yes. That not those particular tools, but stuff like that is an integral part of the curriculum. Even in the summer program, we have a session on the psychology and practice of introspection, and I have a paper I wrote that I have them read and talking about the nature of the mind and how it's organized, and the conscious, the subconscious, the unconscious, why it's difficult to deal with psychological problems, the nature of emotions. So I'm trying, even in our own our week-long program, I'm trying to raise their awareness about that. But in the college program that we've put together, regular meetings with your tutor about your goals and how you're doing to go along to achieve them is integral to the program. And we'll be using all kinds of psychological methodologies to help people with that. And then, of course, being introduced in the very first year to the basics of philosophy and how important knowing what the universe is, how do you know, examining, the different theories about how you know, how to live, how do you live with other people. That's the first part of the first year is all centered around learning things about that. So my answer is yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Now that we're speaking about the mind, I want to leap to evolution, and kind of the evolutionary leap, if you will, from apes to humans is kind of twofold in two big areas. One is the sheer increase in brain size and brain power, and the ability to use reason is enormously improved. And secondly, human beings have what we call a self-reflective consciousness. You are aware of yourself. You can remember and reminisce about your past. You can plan your future. In that sense, we're like a time-traveling machine in a sense. But those two things, Julian Jaynes said they are entirely different, the ability to reason and the self-reflective consciousness. And in Randian literature, and Rand's followers often conflate the two abilities as if they go always together. So who do you think is right? Is it Rand or Jaynes, or is it somewhere the answer's in between?
Well, maybe you could tell me a little more. I read Jaynes' book decades ago, and I think he has really interesting ideas. I don't know if I know enough to have a judgment about whether his theory is right or not, but maybe if you could explain a little bit why he thinks they're different activities, different skills or abilities, then it might help answer the question.
Right, because he says, and this is leading to the next question, he says the self-reflective consciousness arises lexically within a mind, so that when you know language, you can talk with yourself in a nutshell. And when you're talking with yourself, and with the help of parents, mothers typically, you kind of gain that understanding that you are a entity, and you have a past and you have a future. The memory comes in, and somewhere along ages 4 or 5 that begins to happen. Whereas the ability to reason, he thinks, is kind of instinctual in human beings, and the two are completely separate. So you can have an advanced ability to reason without having self-reflective consciousness, and vice versa, which seems kind of very odd for us. And in Randian literature, it's like the consciousness is a leap and reasoning is a leap, and it's almost like the same leap, as if the two things are the same. And my own answers, I think that probably the real answer is somewhere in between, because Jaynes also said, how did a few Spaniards who had self-reflective consciousness easily overcome thousands of Aztecs? Now, could be that led to better reasoning. So I don't quite know the answer, but I think neither is fully.
I'm sorry. In the case of the Aztecs and Cortez, maybe he didn't know that. Oh God, I just almost saw an accident. Maybe he didn't know that out my window. He didn't know that the Aztecs were oppressing many of the tribes in the Mexico area, and so they helped Cortez.
Yes.
So that helps understand better. How did a small band of Spaniards overwhelm a large force of Aztecs? But going back to your question, I mean, what's a little confusing to me is to talk about the skill being lexical, but language is conceptual. So language is reasoning. Rand said reason is the faculty that identifies and integrates the material of the senses. So she's not limiting it to deductive reasoning, for example, or the kinds of things that people might normally limit the meaning of reason. And I don't exactly know what he means that you can reason instinctively. I don't know what that means exactly.
It's like as if this activity is going on subconsciously, but he doesn't try to prove it empirically. He just asserts that reasoning is going on subconsciously. Meanwhile, the self-reflective consciousness arises in at a certain age, and then of course once you have it for the rest of your life.
Well, it's funny because it makes me think of Kessler, because the you know so we can think things in the conscious mind, and material comes in, we are aware of it, we process it. The processing, the making it into a concept or an abstraction is not exactly, it's not like we're consciously doing it, like we're saying, okay, I'm going to make this into abstraction. I mean, later on, yeah, maybe we could do that, but when you're a child, you're not. But you so you're putting that material in your subconscious, but the language is the thing, and other kinds of symbols are the things that tie the perceptual level of consciousness together with the abstract level of consciousness. And so I don't really, and reasoning is about using those abstractions. So I
Yeah.
don't,
So,
I
so
can really see it.
the word me, for instance, is an abstraction that begins to have meaning. As you said, with reasoning, you sort of understand the me is a certain kind of a self
Mhm.
with the body and with the mind, and then we have thoughts and we have a past and we have a future. So that itself is, I agree with you, is a process of reasoning, and it's probably wrong on James's part to make such a harsh distinction between the two.
It's pretty amazing if you know young children, the things that they can figure out when they're 3 years old. It's just astonishing sometimes what they'll come up with, or what the questions they'll ask about why the world is the way it is. And the fact that you go from hardly being able to move yourself to being able to ask those questions in 3 years is mind-blowing.
Yeah, I think that one little modification in Rand's definition of reason would have probably fixed all of this. And if she had said reason is the faculty that identifies and integrates the the material of direct awareness, and that could include not only perception but also our direct awareness of what's going on inside our heads. Like we have thoughts, we have feelings, and we just at some point we learn not only are there things out there to look at and to pay attention to, but also things in here. And once you figure that, then you become self-aware, you become aware of what you're thinking and feeling and imagining. So if you would grant that we are directly aware of things out there and we're directly aware of things in here, then that would kind of solve it. And I think most of the early thinking was, well, we've got to prove that we really are aware of the external world. Otherwise, we're trapped inside our brains, and that freaks out a lot of philosophers. It never bothered me, but but
Yeah, yeah.
you
Well,
know,
I mean,
I mean,
and to use a crude example, you remember Csikszentmihalyi and his concept of flow. And when you're in flow, you're not continually conscious of, this is me, I'm doing this, I want to concentrate. You are already concentrating and
yeah.
you get a better result. And in some
yeah.
card games, for instance, I found when my daughter was 2 or 3 years old, she was fantastic and could beat any adults. But as children get older, they become less fantastic at those simplistic memory games, like you turn the cards upside down and you have to remember which card was where, right?
Mhm.
And very young children beat adults very easily, and they become sort of model. No, model is not the right word, but they become conscious of their own thinking as they age, which is a good thing for deliberative reasoning. But for these simplistic tasks, the flow breaks and we become slower at these kind of things.
Mm.
And maybe that's what led James to this kind of
Huh.
belief that for simplistic tasks, yes, the reasoning is pretty subconscious and it just goes on automatically.
Well, I know
Mhm.
Marsha must remember in Kessler, our act of creation, he talked about what was it, the centipede, and if he paid attention to what his legs were doing, he wouldn't be able to walk because all of that's automatic.
Yeah. Yes. Well,
Yeah,
and the other thing I was thinking with young children, they're putting all their concentrated attention on that game. But once you get older, you, I don't know
Mm.
about you, but I'm just, while I'm waiting to play the game, I'm also thinking about other things. So
Yeah, it's happened to me even in examinations. I had to sort of come. oh, wait a minute, I'm in a 3-hour examination. I've got to concentrate here. I have to tell myself.
Right.
And that ended up wasting time.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Just last year, you had an essay called "Life is Not a Machine or a Ghost." That's one of my favorite false alternatives, and you gave us a third alternative, and so you took a look at these ruling paradigms that most people are kind of caught up in, whether it's supernaturalism or mechanistic reductionism, and you said that we look around us, the world, at plants and animals and human beings, and we see all this goal-directed activity, and we see all this hierarchical structure, and that there's a natural scientific explanation for all these things, and for not just life, but also consciousness and free will and meaning. So you had a nice leisurely opportunity to explain all that, but in just a few moments here, can you tell us how science can help us avoid this trap without this trap of materialism, a mechanism, without falling prey into the notion that the order we see requires a supernatural creator?
Well, my basic answer is that it's, for one thing, you have to let go of the material reductionism coloring your thinking and just look at the world and say, okay, there's loads of stuff out there that's acting in a very goal-directed manner. And admit that, and then say, now I have to figure out how does it do it, right? And that's a basic, the basic question the scientists should be asking. One of the people who I thought was the most brilliant at starting to give an answer about how it can do it is a Austrian, I think he was, scientist named Ludwig von Bertalanffy. He's
Yes.
actually one of the founders of systems theory. And he said, look, and he had what he called the organismic conception, which is that living things are matter that's organized in a certain kind of way that makes it act to perpetuate its own existence. That's what survival is about. And it captures energy and material in order to do that. And it's different than it's some people call it anti-entropic, but because of the theory that everything in the universe is just dissipating. That's the natural tendency. But what living things do is that it takes in material from outside of itself, and it's a system of matter that keeps itself going. The question is, how does it do that? Interestingly, and it's got degrees of freedom in it that enable it to respond to the variability of what's going on in the environment. An example of that is a principle that Bertalanffy called equifinality, which means that you have different conditions that end in the same goal. And you don't ever have that in machines. Machines are created by human beings to fulfill goals, but if you change the initial conditions, they can't reach the same goal. If you have, for example, an embryo, and at a certain point you split it into two parts, it doesn't become two halves of an embryo. It becomes two whole living beings. It becomes twins. That's different than any kind of mechanical thing. And that's because the system is set up to fulfill the goal of making a certain kind of living thing that is going to survive. If you look at consciousness, now, so one of the things Bertalanffy said, he said, for example, when you have large chemical reactions with lots of different things going on, they can respond to what's going on in the environment. The system of them can respond different ways to what's going on in the environment. And this is one of the ways in which a living thing can have a kind of degrees of freedom in the way that it acts. So that Feynman had a very interesting example in his book, Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, where he's watching a paramecium under a slide in an environment where it was losing moisture. And it was trying to decide it looked like it was trying to decide, should it go this way, should it go that way. At one point, it started splitting itself into two, and then it went back again. And so it's trying out different ways to respond to what's going on to the environment, and that's a kind of creativity. So you can see that creativity is basically the essence of being alive, is responding to what's going on in the world. Your system is responding to what's going on to the world in different ways. Now, in terms of consciousness, it seems to me that consciousness is just a later development of this ability to respond to the world in different ways. And this is a new, evolutionarily, a newer form, which allows it, excuse me, if you think about the way when animals first arrived on the scene, they only had the sense of touch and what's called chemotaxis, like a kind of a smell. But of course, they didn't have noses or anything. And then the different senses that developed are different ways in which you can interact with the world to get information in order to be able to adapt to it. So in this way, living things developed this way of responding to the world in a gradual way that ended up developing into consciousness, which is, to my mind, consciousness is a relationship between the world and a certain kind of being that has these abilities. So it's not just in your head, it's in your whole body.
Right.
This is the whole mind-body, the mind and the body are integrated. And it's about your relationship with the world. And free will seems to me to just be another advancement in terms of degrees of freedom. It's a new way. This ability to think abstractly is a new way to respond to the world, and it's a new degree of freedom. So I don't know if that.
Yeah, that made.
I have a lot more data and argument in the paper.
Read the essay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All my essays are available at a website I have called Marsha-Familaro-Enright.com,
Great.
which I'm happy to put in the show notes if you want. So.
Yeah, we'll do that, actually. It's been very, very invigorating, but I want to conclude on a very open-ended question. Would you like to name maybe 2 or 3 psychologists that you admire? And, if you do so, briefly tell us why.
Yes. So the ones that I admire the most, I learned a lot, especially from Nathaniel Brande's first book. Some of his later books too were good.
Book being The Psychology of Self-Esteem? Or?
Yes. But I learned a tremendous amount of psychology from Aristotle. There are certain works, for example, his Rhetoric, that are amazingly psychological. And so is the Ethics, really. He goes into a lot of detail in there. Arthur Kessler, I learned a tremendous amount about. Carl Rogers, he was a psychotherapist, a humanist, and one of his students, Eugene Gendlin. And interestingly, Eugene Gendlin has done a lot of work on what we would call psychoepistemology. Some fascinating work. He was very interested in the psychology. He called it the psychology of the implicit. How do we know things? And he's got some great essays about that. I highly recommend that. It will get you thinking about how your mind is working. Okay.
I think we're almost done for the day. Is there anything else you want to add, Marsha?
Well, just if people are interested, I'd love them to look at our website for our new college, Reliance College, where we've got everything organized, and now we're just in the phase of trying to get the final funding to open it. The program is a combination of a unique and very rigorous classic liberal arts program, in which the students will be learning ideas across the ideological spectrum, and they'll be learning and in historical ideas, and they'll be learning it in a way that so that they can judge for themselves of what they think is right and wrong, and combined with many skills. So we have a special writing program. We'll be teaching them economics and personal finance, the role of art in a well-lived life, and they'll also every year be working on a real-world problem in an area of their professional interest. So what we're trying to do there is combine this rigorous classical liberal program that will prepare them for the rest of their life, especially because we want them to become the entrepreneurs of their own life. They'll be able to change what they're doing, have the vision and the courage and the self-confidence to decide what's good for them and which way they should go and if they should change their jobs or whatever. But we also want to give them a lot of practical experience so that they can go out there and be successful.
That sounds very, very exciting, and we
It's
wish you
terrific.
all the best. To those of you who have been tuning in, we want you to keep tuning in because that's how you become savvy. Bye for now.